I'm Chris Sanchez, and welcome to Sonoma Views, where we talk real estate, property management, restaurant reviews, what's going on in Sonoma County, and everything in between. Today's topic is on property management and a scenario that actually it was brought to me by two different people this month. We're in the middle of August 2019, and earlier this month, at the beginning of the month in August, I received a scenario from two different people, and it was practically the same scenario. So doing this quick video here to share the feedback and my thoughts. My most recent one was just it was through an email. It just said, advice needed, and give me the particular scenario. So here we go. Property management. The scenario is August 1st. I'll make things simple. August 1st, the rent is due. We all know that. The tenant gives their 30-day notice to the landlord. So it's a tenant's 30-day notice that the tenant is moving out. Okay, this is assuming that it's a month-to-month rental agreement. They're not locked under a lease, and the tenants can move out at any time, just like the landlords could end the relationship, the tenancy at any time. So this particular case, the tenant on the 1st of the month gives the landlord a 30-day notice that the tenant is moving out. However, here's the kicker. Instead of paying the rent on the 1st when it's due and giving a 30-day notice, 30-day courtesy legal notice that they're moving out, they don't pay rent. So they withhold the rent payment from their final month, and instead of paying rent, they just hand over a 30-day notice. Hey, I will be out by the end of August, which actually has 31 days, and that's it. So, you could keep the security deposit, but they did not pay rent. So after you get later into the week, later into the month, it's the 5th, 6th, 7th, and there's still no rent payment, then the landlord's like, well, what do I do at this point? They're just stuck holding the bag. They did not get collect any rent for the month, and they're going to have an upcoming vacancy at the end of the month. So what do we do at that point? Here's what I do, and the same recommendation that I gave the two different landlords is issue a 3-day notice to pay rent or quit. Okay, 3-day notice to pay rent or quit. So even though the tenant is already on their way out, even though the tenant has notified the landlord that they are moving out, so the termination of the tenancy is being initiated by the tenant. So in both scenarios, the landlord was not kicking out the tenants, just to be clear. It was the tenant's voluntary decision. I'm moving out within 30 days. So even though that was in place already, they didn't pay the rent, which is still an obligation. So that was my recommendation to both of them. Issue a 3-day notice to pay rent or quit, so you have this overlaying notice on top of the 30-day timeline already that you have, knowing that your tenant's going to be moving out. All right, so the reason I do that, I got my water bottle. The reason that I do that, it's because we want to put them on notice, put the tenant on a legal notice that it is now the 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th of the month in August, and that 3-day notice is a legal notice to pay rent or quit. So now we are able to document, as long as it's properly served. Ideally, you would serve that in person. Here it is. You owe, simple numbers, $2,000 rent for August. It is now the 8th of the month, 9th of the month. It is still not paid. Here is a notice, 3-day notice to pay rent in full or quit. And by quit means hand over the keys and move out. So that's the recommendation, and that's the reason that I do it. Now, what could happen is potentially the tenant could stay there till the end of the month as they expected or anticipated, and then move out on good terms at the end of August and leave the place clean, undamaged, good condition. Here's the keys. You take the August rent from my security deposit. That's what the tenant's kind of banking on. And I know the reasons behind it. So the reasons a tenant would do something like that, it's because they are low on cash or limited cash, and they have to put up a security deposit to secure their future rental. So they're out looking at places, and these are all assumptions, by the way. They're looking at another place. They have to put up a full security deposit. Let's say, simple numbers, $3,000 security deposit. Plus, they have to put up $2,000 as their first month's rent payable in advance. Now, some landlords, here's the kicker, some landlords collect a security deposit, first month's rent, and last month's rent. So, in that scenario, the tenants in question may have potentially been out $3,000 for security deposit, $2,000 for the first month's rent. That's $5,000 plus another $2,000 for the last month's rent. So they're out, $7,000, $7,000 to move in, and therefore I don't have money to pay my existing landlord, and take it out of the security deposit. Okay, so that's kind of the thinking behind it, and I totally get it. So there are two keys here, and hopefully you can learn from this, and I really hope this helps somebody somewhere down the line. One, I never collect a last month's rent in advance. It makes things messy, and it's exactly for this situation. These scenarios is precisely the reason I never collect a last month's rent in advance, because it's in the future. We don't know when the last month is going to be, and on the first of the month, I'm expecting a rent payment. I'm not expecting a 30-day notice and no payment, because face it, a lot of landlords have mortgages, they have other obligations, they have bills that they have to pay, property taxes, depending on when this happens, but somebody's property tax might be due, so they might be $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 property taxes to pay up, and who knows what else. It's a source of income for the landlord. So when they don't get paid, a landlord does not get paid on the first when they're expecting it. It's just like an employee who shows up to work on the 1st or the 15th, and the boss does not have their paycheck that they've earned for the previous 2 weeks. Okay, same thing. It's a loss of income. So that's one of the reasons I never collect the last month's rent. And then the second thing, and this is the most important part for anybody watching this, is look at your rental agreement. Okay, and that was my response to both of them. Thankfully, one of these landlords used my template, a blank lease agreement, so it was based on the format that the leases that I used, the rental agreements, and then the other one was not, so I don't know what the circumstances were. But the response, or my best suggestion, was you have to look at your rental agreement to see what it states. What does it say regarding last month's rent, or how did you collect money in advance? Sorry, I'm propping up the phone here on top of the steering wheel. I'm in the other truck right now. I don't have my bracket, my holder. My rental agreement, my lease agreement, clearly states in multiple places that the security deposit may not be used towards rent period at all. And specifically, it may not be used for the last month's rent. So security deposit is security deposit money only. It may not be used, it may not be applied towards the payment of rent, past due rent. It may not be used for future rent, and it may not be used for the last month's rent. That is the reason we keep the accounting super clean. When I move in a tenant, I only collect a full security deposit, say $3,000 in full, cashier's check, certified good funds. So I collect a full security deposit in advance, and then I will collect 1 full month of rent, which is the first month's rent, if it's actually a full month. Sometimes I may just do I often do a prorated month of rent, first month's rent. I hope I didn't lose anybody there. So if it's the 10th of the month, for example, when somebody's moving in, simple numbers, I would do a $3,000 security deposit, payable in full. I don't do payment plans on security deposit. You either have the money, or the tenant either has the money or they don't. Very cut and dry. And then I do a prorated first month's rent. So if they move in on the 10th of the month, for example, instead of having a $2,000 rent coming in, it might be $1,500 or whatever it is. running math off the top of my head, but they would pay 20 days of rent. You know, if they take possession on the 10th, I would collect rent from the 10th to the 30th, which would be 20 days of rent instead of 30 days of rent. And that's just at the time that they move in, at the time they take possession, because it makes it very clear. Okay, so they move in August 10th, they are paid through August 31st. On September 1st, the first month, the full month of rent is due. Okay, I hope I didn't lose anybody there. So just to summarize again, I only collect a full security deposit plus first month's rent. Never, ever, ever collect last month's rent, because it makes it messy on the way out, and it gives the tenant the opportunity to come up on the first of the month when you're expecting a rent payment, and they just give you a notice that they're moving out, and you have no income, because specifically when a tenant paid first and last month's rent when they moved in, they paid it already. They don't, you know, you're expecting a check or a deposit in your bank account on the first, but instead you just get a 30-day notice. So in that particular case, tenants may have been prepaid, but in many cases they did not. So if the rent is due, even if it's the last month, serve them a 3-day notice to pay rent or quit. Document that. Have it documented that you're demanding payment in full. You're documenting that they did not pay their last month's rent, because what it's going to come down to is when they eventually do move out, and here's another key, assuming that they actually move out when they intended to, then they told you to, then you have to settle up the security deposit. You have to do the closing statement and the disposition. And by the way, you will, landlords, you will take their any amount that was due, specifically their last month's rent, and withhold that from the security deposit, because you know they left you an outstanding bill, outstanding charges. But you should make every effort to collect that in advance. Now, the other alternative, it's like, okay, if you're not going to pay August rent, negotiate and have some sort of settlement. Be out by the 15th. Don't worry about the rent. I'll cut my losses there, but give me the keys on the 15th, because I need to get the place cleaned, turned around, and I'm going to try to get a new tenant in here for the first. So at that point, it's just a matter of negotiation between the two parties. But what you're entitled to as a landlord is the full month's rent, not just a 30-day notice when a tenant moves out. I hope that answers that. There's tricky little nuances there with those scenarios, but it all depends on what is written into the rental agreement. That's the first place to look. And then secondly, it's how do you approach it based on the scenario and the relationship as well. Because the last point regarding that, the other thing to support the 3-day notice, which I'm recommending, a 3-day notice to pay rent or quit. That 3-day notice is the very beginning of a legal eviction process. If you don't serve that notice, then it's going to be hard to actually get the tenant out if they in fact do not move out at the end of August as they promised you they would. If you end up moving into September and it's September 15th and now they're middle of September, they haven't paid rent in August, they haven't paid rent in September, now you're going into the second month and still no rent, and at this point the tenant is squatting. And in order to start that eviction process, you have to serve a 3-day notice to pay rent or quit. And then after 3 days, you could begin the legal eviction process. And then that could take potentially 2 months, and who knows, maybe $2,500, maybe $3,000, depending what your legal fees are, and ultimately lead in a sheriff eviction if this person doesn't get out. And then you would have a hostile situation, and you would be out more months of rent, legal fees, and they're probably not going to leave the place in clean condition, probably going to leave trash behind, possibly damages, and that eviction is going to be costly. So the sooner you can start that 3-day notice, the sooner it puts them on legal notice that you're trying to collect, and hopefully they hand over the keys, give you possession sooner than later. Otherwise, you have to go the ugly route, which is the unlawful detainer legal eviction process, and that could be lengthy and it could be costly. So I hope this information is helpful in one way or another. I'm Chris Sanchez. This is Sonoma Views. I'm a full-time property manager, licensed property manager, and licensed contractor. I'm happy to help in any way I can. If you find value from these, I'd appreciate if you subscribe and follow along. You'll get to see the future videos that I'm trying to put out on a weekly basis. And until next time, talk to you soon.